So I'm going to introduce you to Nicola Wade, who's going to introduce herself, and then she's going to chair panel 1. So I'll hand over to Nicola. Thank you, Nicola.
Okay, this is on, isn't it? Thank you very much, Kath, and hello everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicola Wade, and I'm the Head of Commissioning and Partnerships at the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. So I lead on commissioning a whole range of services, including victim services, and it's been my privilege to be part of the expansion of sexual violence services that Kath talked about earlier. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. So today we are talking about the criminal justice process, and you can see the question behind me. The question is, how can the criminal justice process be more supportive of the mental health of survivors of child sexual and or domestic abuse, and what's already been done? And we've got our panel of experts here, so we'll just start off by introducing them. So, Tamar.
Hi, I'm Tamar. I'm a survivor and been part of Imara's participation group.
Thank you, Katrin.
Hi, I'm Kat. I'm a Chisra at Imara.
Thanks, Kyle.
Hi, I'm Kyle. I was a Chisra at Imara from 2018 to 2022.
Thanks, Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Oates. I'm the head of the Rape and Serious Sexual Offences Unit at the Crown Prosecution Service in East Midlands.
Hi, I'm Emma Harewood. I'm the director of the Blue Star Project and international advisor on the Barnahus model. Do we need to sit a little bit further apart so we don't get feedback?
And I'm Abby Goucher. I'm Detective Chief Inspector for Nottinghamshire Police. I work in children's investigations, so exploitation, abuse, neglect for Nottinghamshire Police. So thank you for inviting me today.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. So the first question we've been asked to think about is, what do we mean by supportive of the mental health of survivors of child sexual abuse and or domestic abuse? And what do we hear from survivors that they need or that would help them through the criminal justice process? So Kat and Carl, I think I'm going to start with you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the bare bones of it, I think what I hear from survivors is that we need consistency, we need clarity, and we need a compassionate approach to support as they move through the system. So to be able to get a clear answer of what's going to happen, when's it going to happen, and for that also not to change, for that to stay the same, to get a clear answer that is consistent and that's also compassionate, that we're coming from a place of wanting for that survivor on that day to have the best possible experience of the interview or of the court process or of just even a pre-trial visit. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you said. They need to know what to expect. I think to have as much control or say as well in a process that's already out of their control, whether it's where to have support, where to meet, if it's the right time to even engage, because I remember, contacting children and young people, and just because I've contacted them doesn't mean that it's the right time for them. And to have that support when they're receiving updates, and consideration around them. Worked with families where they got an update when they're at the checkout in Asda and there's no consideration for where that leaves them. And for those supporting, working with that child, just to remember that it is a long process. Heard from children, young people, that people forget that it's not just day one when they disclose that's important to have that support and consideration, but day 35, day 200, they'll be maybe in school or in college and looking forward to, a holiday or maybe not looking forward to preparing for GCSEs and things like that, and then they'll get an update out of the blue. And, they said that people have forgotten actually that I'm waiting for news, and it's not just that a year ago I disclosed all this and I had support and then people have forgotten or things have kind of fallen to the wayside now. But the whole process is out of their control, and I think just that consideration of what that journey can look like and just remembering that can make a difference. And like you said, consistency, consideration, we can make a difference by remembering that when supporting someone.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think echo what you say, but it's also someone to advocate, and I think there's a lot that goes on, there's various stages, and having that consistent person that supports you and is there for you and not what's going on and not the investigation itself, and having that person that you know has got your best interest and not a wider sort of focus. And yeah, and things are quite difficult sometimes to digest and understand and sort of know what's to come. So it's thinking about the preparation and the support throughout it all. So yeah, echo what you say.
I just wanted to add how important I think it really is with that preparing to digest updates and news, because even if it isn't the news that they want, that maybe their case isn't going forward, how you support someone to understand that, because without that, you then will have children that have thought, oh, the case didn't go to court, or we got a not guilty because they didn't believe me. Mm-hmm. And that's so important, I think, to capture like what's behind the decision that was made, and know that it wasn't that it was anything the children did wrong or that they weren't believed. The outcome might be out of your control, but how you support someone and help them to understand something, we can help with.
Being that safety net. Yeah.
Thank you. Emma? I think that really holistic approach really resonates with what I've seen in Europe in the Barnahus model. So I did some practice research last year with about 11 European countries, and what I really noticed was that it wasn't just about the therapy that you receive, which is often the bit that's commissioned. It's actually a real continuum of recovery, and it was something about, the importance of involving young people in preparing first before you even, hit them with, some therapy. It's they're giving them the space really to have some choice, to think about the pace and some control, but also the support for their family members as well, not just what the child needs. And again, often we just commission the piece of therapy for the child, but we don't think about the family. But I think the other thing that really struck me in those Barnahus in Europe was the importance of participation, creating space for children and young people to actually be involved, to give back. So having kind of completed, some support with the service, enabling them to have some space to give back to that service, to leave some kind of a legacy, to know that they can help make the service better for other children in future. And actually that in itself is really reparative and part of that whole kind of recovery journey.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just wanted to acknowledge that we are talking here about child sexual abuse and domestic abuse. We haven't got an IDFA on the panel today, but we do know that there are support for families who've been, for survivors and their children who've been affected by domestic abuse, both with Crown Court support, through other IDFA support, and also family court support. Okay, so moving on then, we've got another question panel to consider, and that is, to what extent does what is currently in place meet the needs of survivors? And Abby, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, sure. So to comment on what's currently available, within Nottinghamshire Police, we have specially trained officers who are on response. We've got about 145 of those officers who have been specially trained to deal with victim survivors of sexual abuse. So they work on response, so they're not investigators like the teams that I lead, but they are able to deal with and support the victim survivors. We've also got the public protection officers who have specialist training in children's sexual offences and also adults, so domestic abuse. So they would be able to do the video recorded interview. We make use of the Section 28, which is pre-recorded cross-examination that happens in private. That's before a trial might take place. It's conducted in a less intimidating environment, which is really supportive for that victim survivor. We have special measures, which you may be aware of, whereby we can apply to have screens put up in the courtroom itself and no wigs essentially on the people within the court. We can apply for a live link where that victim survivor is not physically in that courtroom, and we can do pre-visit familiarisation with our victim survivors. We have registered intermediaries who support children to give their video recorded interview. They will explain and help that child to understand the pre-trial visit. They hold a lot of weight in court, and it's a National Crime Agency function which is funded by the police. When it gets into the court arena, it's then funded by the Crown Prosecution Service. so we make use of all those things.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. Echo everything that Abby said there. Obviously, a lot of crossover between the police, our colleagues, and my organisation, the Crown Prosecution Service. I think one of the biggest developments for us as an organisation in recent times has been the inception of our victim liaison officers in dedicated RASO cases. I think that's been a really important step for us. The work that Imara and other organisations do is fantastic. It's a huge support, but we've had to look at ourselves and we've had to look inside our own organisation to realise that we need to do our bit. We can't just expect the third sector to do everything for victims and survivors. So I think that's been a huge development, knowing that the victims and survivors of this most sensitive and difficult offending type have a dedicated contact point who can work with them along that journey, work with the support services to ensure that they're getting the communication to achieve all of those points that have been said so well in the previous question, to ensure that they understand the expectations and what's to follow. I think that's been really important. Abby mentions registered intermediaries. I think that is something that between us as a prosecution team, we have to keep at the forefront of our minds, because the criminal justice system is a confusing, a challenging, difficult area, and some of the questions that can get asked, particularly at the most difficult time in the trial, they can be really confusing. And to have someone there who can say, this is what this young person needs, this is how they will digest information, we need to have that at the forefront of everything that we do. Pre-trial meetings, that's something that's led by our victim liaison officers. Again, I think it's all about demystifying, breaking down those barriers. We can sometimes, as an organisation, as a wider organisation, the criminal justice system, we can forget how complicated and how difficult it is. We've got to break down those walls so that people can understand what's coming, and to give that information to them in a way that they can understand and a way that they can digest, and support services are key to that. And I'm really pleased that we have that bridge now, to use the phrase, Kath, you've used, a bridge between our organisation and the support services, I think is something that will continue to meet those needs.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I suppose this panel, I just wanted to mention the wider support that is on offer. So I know there's a panel later around holistic support, and I think that discussion is going to be really important. But I think in terms of the question that we've been asked to consider and the criminal justice system, it's about having the right support at the right time, isn't it? Because therapy has a place in terms of helping people to process what's happened and to be able to rebuild and move on. It needs to work, unfortunately, it needs to work within the constraints of the criminal justice, within the criminal justice system. But we are lucky to have in Nottinghamshire, we do have a range of specialist services, including crisis support, ISVA, dedicated CHISVA provision and therapy. And I guess it's about survivors being able to access it at the right time for them. So Tamar, what's your view?
Yeah, so the only main support I had was obviously from Imara, and I think the CHISVA was vital in that, in like I said earlier, the consistency, and the police is who refer me to Imara. But I think we speak about the CHISVA and how great they are, and of course that's important, but I think it's often being a sort of buffer between you and the police and between you and the CPS. And actually, if we look at, obviously they're here, we look at the CPS, we look at the police and how they themselves, how they communicate, the timeframes that they give, how they work with the survivor directly is also really important, because we shouldn't have to have an intermediary in a way, an advocate, to work with the CPS and with the police. It should be that collaborative approach, and that is getting better, but there's a huge emphasis there on should, and it should happen. These timeframes should be the case. The communication should be every so many months, but it's not always. It's getting better, but it's certainly not always. And I think that's what's really important, that yes, we have the support at the different times and the therapy and the CHISVA, but how the professionals themselves communicate and how empathetic they are with training, with meeting different survivors, and also not being afraid to sort of reach out to create that trust, which I think is often the case. But yeah, that's...
I think it's a gap, like the name of the conference, we have a gap between what the offer is and what is down on paper and what the systems have decided is should be offered to survivors, but there is a gap between what it's supposed to be, like you're saying, Imara, and what actually does happen. So having recently got back from America, I've had the opportunity to look at the way that different criminal justice systems operate and the different support that's available, and I genuinely feel that we have a really, really good offer. I think it's very, we've got a good patchwork of different systems and organisations that are working together to support survivors, and I often think about it as kind of culminating on the day of the trial of the Section 28, because that's kind of where it comes to a head. But the difficulty is, like you say, it doesn't always happen the way it's supposed to, and that can be for a myriad of reasons. And as Chisvers, we can say to the family, sort of blue in the face, this is what's supposed to happen, I think this will go this way, I think this person will say this thing, but we can't make those promises, because as soon as we step into the court buildings, that system, we don't have the control, we don't have the power, and we feel that, but if we think that we're feeling that, the survivor is going to be feeling that 10 million times more. So we can't make those promises, and like you say, we can be a voice, we can advocate for them, we can be a bit of a buffer, a bit of a go-between, in a positive way as well, being able to have the to know what the survivor wants, for them to tell us that, and to be able to deliver that to the person that can make the decision or to make that choice. But inherently, the survivor is the person who's going to be most impacted by anything that strays out of that, you know, ideal of being consistent, being clear, being compassionate. We don't have that control.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think echoing what you say, and you know, I know it's beyond our control to kind of make those changes or to control like how things go. I guess speaking for what the impact can be, just thinking about adjournments for example, you're considering how that can affect someone. It could be a year or 2 years of this build up in anxiety towards going to give testimony or be asked questions, not knowing what questions you're going to be asked, but it's on the kind of one thing that you've probably tried to part away in your mind. And there could be an adjournment 2 weeks before. Families might have a holiday planned for after, it will be done and we'll go away, and then there's adjournment, or knowing that it will be done before you start your next school. And it could even be on the day you're in court and then it's adjourned for whatever reason. It might be jury issues, another thing that's out of their control, and just what impact that can have on the young person and the family around them. And as well, everyone supporting them that's tried to do everything they can to put things in place. And those are other, I guess, aspects to the whole journey that a young person and family can be on.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much. And just wanted to pick up on the point about adjournments, which I know many of you will be really familiar with. And I know I've had lots of discussions with Kath and Steph and others about it, and also with the Adult Is for Service, which I think is here today too. It's really challenging. Adjournments are super hard, and they're super hard on survivors. And there are, you've talked a lot about the loss of control within this process. Now, we have looked into this in terms of why the adjournments are happening, and trying to work out, well, what can we do within Nottinghamshire to try to make this better, recognising that there are a lot of national problems here that are outside of our control to fix. And I think we've made some strides in terms of better understandings around the pressures on the courts and how the courts really are trying to prioritise cases with children, but there are enormous pressures on them. So I'm not excusing it, but there is a system here that we need to try to, that we have to work within. But it is up to all of us, I think, in Nottinghamshire to try and make the system work as best as we can. And some of the things that you've talked about around communication and those points around control are really important. Okay, so I've been asked to just to mention the Centre for Expertise in CSA, in Child Sexual Abuse. They have a directory of services that can be used to identify what's available locally. We're aware that not all of you are from Nottinghamshire, so that directory is a really good resource for you to identify what you have in your area. So I'm going to hand over to Emma now, who's just going to talk to us about the Barnhouse model.
Yeah, thank you. I often think when I mention the word, if it's a word that's familiar with other people, but the Barnhouse is a European model for supporting children and families after child sexual abuse, something that I'm really passionate about. I established the first Barnhouse in the UK, in London, back in 2018. And you can see it's got 4 rooms in the house here. And in London and in Europe, it often is a house, literally one building, where all the agencies come together. But actually, I think what I've been really reflecting on over the years is that those principles of the Barnhouse model can be equally applicable here. And what I'm loving hearing already from the panel, as I think in my head about those 4 rooms I'm so familiar with, I see them here in Nottingham. So there's the kind of the safety, stabilisation type room, which is around child protection, but also for me it's around a kind of a consistent support, some navigation, someone or a service that will help children and families understand what is a really complex process. Then there's a room there that's about health, again, not just diagnostics or forensic evidence, but actually that really restorative process of a good health examination that thinks about the child's whole body, that can actually help them bring up all sorts of things that might have been going on in their life, particularly even related to other neglect or domestic abuse. Then there's the justice room, and we've just heard earlier about what the fantastic work that already happens in Nottingham, but the justice room for me is around enabling child-friendly interviews, whether that's the video recorded interview, whether that's the cross-examination under Section 28, whether that's the ISVA, the CHISVA that works with them, the registered intermediary, it's about making that bit work. And then the 4th room is a therapeutic room, and again, not just therapy for the child, but for their whole family, their siblings as well. And what isn't in this picture, but I always like to mention, is that all of those 4 rooms, they only work well if they're underpinned by really strong partnership work and multi-agency information sharing at the right time. And what I'm really struck by hearing already on the panel this morning is those strong partnerships. Nicola saying, when I was talking to Kath, we've got police and crime commissioners talking to the voluntary sector, talking to the police. We've got, strength in the CPS, bringing in the victim officers. So I think actually, even without a building called a Barnhouse in Nottinghamshire already, you are managing to deliver lots of the things that happen in those 4 kind of virtual rooms, if you like.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Emma, and that's really encouraging. It's really encouraging to hear, and some of you will know that... excuse me. Some of you will know that we have had discussions in previous years around a Barnhouse model and whether we could develop one. We could develop one in Nottinghamshire. We don't have the house, but I hope that we do have many of the elements that make it work. I think the partnership working does exist. We do have specialist therapy for children and young people delivered by a specialist organisation, both in terms of working with children and young people, but also in terms of really understanding the impact of this terrible thing on children and young people. So I think we are lucky to have that. And to have our CHISVA service. There's always more to do, so I would never say that we have a perfect system in Nottinghamshire. There's definitely more that we could do. But I think we do have a lot of really good building blocks in place. Okay, so moving on then, I think we have another question. So what more is needed? So questions to the panel, what more is needed and what would you like to see change? Kat?
On board with what we're all trying to do today and kind of thinking about best practice and the end result for each survivor. So there's a lot of variation kind of whether that's picked up on right at the beginning. So like registered intermediaries are absolutely fantastic, but it also relies on potentially diagnosis or someone speaking up to that child saying, have we thought about this? Or even knowing that an intermediary is a thing that we can ask for, we can get in place. If that's not picked up on at the police stage, whether we're able to bring that in later at the CPS stage, whether there's the funding for that to bring it in at that point. The opinion of a specific judge on a particular day with a whole host of different kind of contextual elements that every person is bringing into each day. So I would really, really love to see this offer that we've got be consistent across the board, to be able to sit down with a young person in the family and say, you will be offered this, it will be implemented exactly as the police and CPS and we have agreed is best, to be able to say this is what's going to happen, and for them to know that they can trust in the system to support them as it's supposed to.
Yeah, I think what Kat said there is obviously really important, but I think from my point of view, beyond sort of the policy and the special measures, what I really felt was just the lack of empathy, and I think that goes from schools all the way through to the Crown Prosecution Service, and the various professionals that you meet and encounter, quite frankly, just seem to not care half the time, and I think that's for me a concern. It's getting better, as I say, I do believe that, but in terms of police officers, that includes sort of the ones that come out sort of first response, and obviously the work that's now going on to sort of counter that, the court staff, the barristers, sort of everyone you meet, you obviously have positive experiences, but the vast majority are negative. And I think we've really got to look at that and how, obviously, you can't make people care, but we've got to make sure that survivors encounter people that are bothered and that do care, because, quite frankly, that just can't happen. And I think there's also then the side of what comes from that is the blame and the guilt that the survivor will feel, whether that's sort of a no-charge letter from the CPS or the police sort of question you, or the way that you liaise with the CPS and with the police. Obviously, they've got their job to do, and we totally respect that, but the communication and how they do that has to really be important. And it's the gap. So obviously, we've got all these services, we've got all these sort of policies and all that, but it's people still fall through the gaps, and it's how we recognise that early, like Kat says, and not let that happen. But we've got to have people there that recognise that people are falling through the gaps, and that young people are recognise what more can be done, looking at the person as a whole, as the CHISFA do, but it shouldn't be down to a CHISFA, and they've really got their limitations. So yeah, I think I get that there's so much more that goes into it, but I would really like to see sort of the communication that's improved, empathy, and I think it's also not being afraid to care, and I think I've heard that a lot, that police officers sort of don't know how, if they feel like I get it, how they deal with it, and if they sort of go too far, then it's, but actually just being a human about it is fine. And I think it's within them that they've got to learn how to do that and how that works for them. Because I recognise that most of them do care. That's why they're in the job, but it's how they do that is up to them.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Tamar, I completely understand where you're coming from. And I met with the participation group about 18 months ago, and I want to sort of update you in terms of we listened to what you said as the victim survivor group, and so I'm currently implementing trauma-informed training, learning, I like to say really, for the whole of Notts Police. And when I started looking at that, I thought, who's the best people with the best, quickest impact that I can make? And it's not necessarily my teams on the public protection, it's the response officers who are getting ragged around by the sergeant saying, you've got to go to the next job, you've got to go to the next job. And for me, it's about them putting the foot on the ball and going, okay, I'm looking after, potentially a high-risk missing, exploited child who has gone missing from home, and actually, instead of, barging away in there, putting hands on, going, come on, you're coming with me, and that person then potentially, reacting in such a way, getting arrested, and it all going wrong. It's about recognising the trauma that's experienced. So it's being rolled out already to the response officers, and then it's going to be to the whole of the organisation, from people who pick the phone up to people who deal with the investigations. The training recognises how everyday stressors are different to trauma, and how trauma and adverse childhood experiences can impact an individual. It's officers to reflect on trauma-informed practice, resisting the re-traumatisation, helping to support and keep people feeling safe, and giving that control back to an individual, obviously where appropriate. We've looked at the intersectionality, so the gender lens, the race and racism lens, and all those things, all those considerations that bring additional challenges to an individual. Looking at grounding techniques for officers who actually feel traumatised themselves, going to different incidents, but also the language used and the victim blaming. That's not just a police, issue as such, but it can be from different organisations. I went to the exploitation conference a few weeks ago, and a victim survivor had seen what the police and social care and education had written about them, and it completely re-traumatised. So we want to completely and utterly avoid that, think about what we're writing, not give an opinion, but give the facts of this is what's happening in front of me, not this is what I think, and using those victim blaming languages. So we're working really hard, and I'm really passionate about it. I'm leading on it, so I'm really privileged to come back to tell you that we have listened to you and that we are working towards that.
Thank you.
Okay.
In terms of what I'd like to see change, I guess some of the misunderstandings or the myths around things. So, I guess with my Blue Star hat on, we still see, even after the new CPS guidance came out in 2022, we still see practitioners really fearful about delivering therapeutic support pre-trial, while there's an open police investigation, before it's come to trial, even though so few cases do make it to trial anyway. And we really worry about that fear. We really want to be able to obviously support and encourage people. It's okay to work therapeutically and to support them to think about their notes. But I think the other real myth that I've been hearing about just recently is since Section 28 rolled out, that actually, there's always evidence and things around these, isn't there? And there was a really tiny piece of evidence that got a lot of areas rattled that said if you take a Section 28 pre-recorded approach, the jury's less likely to find you guilty. And there was some worrying stats. If you dig into it, though, for children, it was a 1% difference, which is tiny. And, if it was my child, I would much rather they were able to avail of Section 28, and to be able to have that cross-examination in a much more managed way, pre-recorded, with the questions thought about, even if it made that tiny 1% difference to the conviction rate. And yet these things become a myth. They get taken all out of proportion, and suddenly Section 28 is a bad thing. So I think for me, that's what I'd love to do. People not to, and it's really easy with social media, isn't it? Not to jump on that little fact and then catastrophize it, but actually really understand what's this telling us.
I think kind of similar to that about some awareness, and I think it's quite a big task because you want it to kind of reach everyone. But for me, one thing would be how you appropriately highlight myths and incorrect beliefs that still play in the criminal justice process. Whether it's how do you reach, because anyone could be on a jury, couldn't they? And you don't know what their prejudices are, what myths they believe, and I'm sure it doesn't happen all the time, but there's been some cases where even the angle that the barrister's going at are playing into myths, and you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're using that phrase, and you think, is that going to sway the jury? And I think just education on things like that, these rape myths, they're so dangerous, the impact on them in what people can believe, or how they can be played. And I think as well as that, just maybe beliefs in kind of smaller ways, like community responses as well. So thinking of to disclosures, whether incidences are reported to police or not, to think about there might be beliefs that we handle this as a family, or we go to the church and the pastor deals with it. How you also help with that as well, that might be causing a bit of a hurdle or barrier to children and young people disclosing and being heard. So there's a bit of a double one there. You've got kind of beliefs that can impact or cause a hurdle, but then also beliefs and myths that I think are out there, and how do we kind of work through that? I would really like to see some of that being broken away.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And I just want to pick up on that, because I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that we do have in Nottinghamshire, but I know other areas have this too, is that there are programmes in schools to help children understand what healthy relationships are, and to start to understand some of the issues around consent. And we know that these programmes work, and I think they're incredibly important, because those children who are going through those programs, those children are the juries of the future. So helping them to understand what's healthy and what's not is incredibly important. So yeah, thank you for that, Carl.
Yeah, and I think, and further on to that, I think it's really good, and such a strong and important step of teaching young people about consent and healthy relationships, but also a lot younger, just teaching children about body safety. So I was part of the NSPCC Pants launch campaign in 2013, and I think it's really, really important. I remember back then people being a bit iffy about it, like, well, you can't talk to such young children about these things, and it's about how you do it in an appropriate way of starting to plant that seed about what's healthy, what belongs to you, and it works. You know, I've got a 5-year-old, and I'm sorry, I didn't create the song, by the way, if you've heard it. It's so annoying. He really, really likes it, and he plays it on repeat. And he's so clever. Like, I didn't have YouTube back then, but now he knows how to loop it as well. So it just loops and loops. But he knows about it, and he told me that he's seen the pants poster at school in the toilets, and, you know, ask him about it, and he can feed back, like, you know, that's private. And I think just starting that early, it gives children an understanding, it gives them a language as well, before it's maybe coated by damage, you know, coated by hurt, and how do they then express if something's happened, or they've seen something, or just something that's made them uncomfortable. There's already that language that's a bit, it's not scary like adults think it can be, but I think it's also, it arms parents as well, who might not know how you broach that with a child. Like, I know how to tell a child how not to cross the road unsafely. I just won't talk about it, like you don't. And I think it's great for children to, you know, to have that skill and armour for themselves, but also for parents and schools and carers. I think it's really good, and I just want to see that more and wider.
Brilliant, thank you. So pants song on repeat. Brilliant, thanks. Tamar.
Yeah, I think obviously that is really important to be the negative one as always. I feel like though it's how we deliver that, and I think it's how we teach that, especially like sort of secondary school age. It's all well and good saying that we're going to have sort of healthy relationships teaching and all this, but it's how it's delivered. And I think, like, for us, it was during form time. Our form tutor has no experience, no knowledge, well, as far as I was aware anyway, that's how it was meant to be delivered. And it didn't go well, and it never did go well, and none of my friends ever thought it went well. It had the opposite effect. It became a joke, it became a game, and it was a lesson to do nothing. And I think also you've got to think about the survivors that are in them rooms, that perhaps teachers aren't aware of, well, they should be, but they're often not. And also, just a bit of a personal one, but the word healthy relationships rings alarm bells for me, because after it was initially disclosed, the school's response and the social care response was to put both me and the perpetrator into sort of a healthy relationship, not together, into a healthy relationship 6-week course. So at that time, looking back now, our relationship wasn't healthy, but that wasn't the right thing to do, sort of 2 weeks post-disclosure. And it's sort of, yes, it's great, but it should be not used afterwards. I think it needs to be prevention rather than sort of like a treatment almost. And it's how we use it and when it's used, and it's about prevention, not post. So yeah, I think it's great, but we've really got to look at how that's being delivered, where that's being delivered, and when it's being delivered.
Just listening to you talking about kind of ages and what happens at different ages, I'm really struck by some of the kind of arbitrary age cut-offs that we have. So, 10 for criminal responsibility, 13 you can go to a sexual health clinic on your own. That kind of funny window between 16 and 18 when you're an adult, but you're not quite an adult, but you sort of, there could be barriers to what you can access. And I look at Scotland, and Camille, who you're going to hear from later, is working a lot in Scotland at the moment, and they just have a really different approach. Like you're a young person till you're a much, much older age, you know, often even up into 25. And that impacts on not only on how you can access health and care, but also how you're treated in the justice system. So, yeah, I'm not sure I know an answer necessarily, but I'm just really struck by the fact that they take such a different response in Scotland, and I just wonder whether we should think about that.
I want to pick up on Tamar's point, really. I think we, in the criminal justice system, need to see the person behind the case. I think that really is important. I've worked in criminal justice for around 20 years now, and as Tamar indicates, I've not met many people at all who don't care. That's why they're in the job. These are challenging, pressured, difficult jobs that exist in difficult subject matters. People do them for a reason, and that's usually because they truly do care about the people behind those cases. But I think, as Tamar says, they themselves have to allow themselves to be humans as well, and to show that they do care and to think about that. They are busy jobs. We have thousands of cases. Individuals might be carrying hundreds of cases. But to the people behind each of those cases, it's their only case, and it might be the most important thing, certainly, that's happening at that moment, probably one of the most important things that ever happens to them in their lives. You know, it's life-changing, and we need to keep that at the heart of everything we do. And that will, because, you know, these people care, we all care, if we're thinking that way, then we will make better decisions. We will continue to develop. I think, as Abby has said as well, there are signs of green shoots. You know, I think we are heading in the right direction as a criminal justice system. I think the Joint National Action Plan has put lots of good changes in place for how we communicate with victims, for trauma-informed learning, for myths and stereotypes. I'm pleased to see that the organisation and the police have come together to now put in place a joint justice plan for domestic abuse, which kind of mirrors that approach for sexual offending that the JNAP put in place. But we need to keep that at the heart of everything we do. So, you know, when we're thinking about how we're going to communicate a decision, and we do have to take very difficult decisions sometimes, and sometimes they may not be the decision that that person wants to hear, and I think we're all realistic and we understand that. But how we communicate that, when, where, and who by, is something that is often within our complete control. And we've got to engage those support services, the ISVAs, CHISVAs, IDVAs. You know, we've got to engage them and think about them and ask them, how will this person want to be told? When will they want to be told? And I think, you know, what would I like to see change? Well, I'd like to see more sharing and learning for our organisations, as Abby's indicated there, from, you know, hearing from victims and survivors. I don't want to embarrass Tamar, but I heard Tamar speak a few years ago, and it was a moment in time for me that changed the way I thought about things. You know, comments around how the size of a font changing throughout a letter and a spelling error, that type of thing, makes that person feel that the writer doesn't care. Of course the writer cares, but that's not the impression that we're always giving. So we've got to keep that at the forefront of everything that we do. And we've got to be innovative as well. And I think that's what I'd like to see change across the criminal justice system. I think we are seeing some really good things. You know, there's a judge in Lincolnshire who has taken it upon themselves to develop the Vulnerable Victim Scheme, which is effectively an alternative to Section 28, where that might not be the most appropriate thing. The judge will put something in place that ensures that that case is heard within 6 months. You know, that is a judge putting himself out there, thinking of something that he can do in his area, and that's gone down really well. And I know there's interest in that and other schemes as well. And we see that across other counties as well. I think those decisions are made because people are thinking about the people behind those cases. And I think if we keep that at our heart, then those green shoots will continue to grow. That's the main thing.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, of course you can.
Now that we're on the ball and thinking about everything that we want to change, obviously there's more. And just a few threads from what we've all been saying, but Kath I really liked what you said at the beginning about taking the most generous approach we possibly could. And what I'm hearing from all of us on the panel is how much we care about this. And we're all here because we care about survivors of child sexual abuse and domestic abuse. But something I think we can change as professionals and the way that we treat each other is remembering that a lot of the time people are drawn to this kind of work because they really care about it from a personal lens. Sometimes they're survivors. I know we've got a lot of survivors in here today. You are very welcome. And remembering that we don't always know what is going on in somebody's life and the reason why they are so passionate about their work. And it makes me think about something that my clinical supervisor says to me is that thinking about the most loving and compassionate approach we could take to someone, what is the most loving and compassionate way I could think about this person's actions and behaviour, and being generous with each other as professionals and practitioners, that most of us are doing our best, like you've said, and we all care, and kind of retaining a bit of that care for each other, as well as survivors being the most important people, but retaining that compassion in the way that we partnership work and share information, and the way that we perceive other professionals as showing up when we're talking about child sexual abuse. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you. Moving on, because we're just slightly behind time. It's fantastic, some of the good practice and some of the really positive approach that's being mentioned. But what are the challenges around making the criminal justice process more supportive of survivors? What are the barriers or trade-offs that prevent change from happening? Tom?
I think we know one of the biggest challenges is that of funding and resourcing, but we can't hide behind that. You know, we have to do what we can on a daily basis to improve, to be more efficient, to make progress. I think, as you've just mentioned there, that the sort of multi-agency makeup of the criminal justice system is inherently a challenge because there are so many different parts that have to come together. So I think that is one of the challenges. We know delays are a huge challenge. Adjournments, as Kyle spoke about earlier, can be particularly difficult to understand and comprehend. For me, I think what we have to do throughout that is to be realistic with people, to manage those expectations. If you know how long you're waiting for something, if you have a date to work to, that is inherently easier to cope with than nothing, and existing without knowing what's going to come and when it's going to come. That silence, that vacuum, you know, as humans, we don't like that. It's against our nature. We like to be in control. People deserve to be in control, particularly around things that are so important. So I think, again, that's something that we have to keep the person at the forefront of everything we do to ensure that we're being honest with them and working with their support services to guide them through. Because at the moment, what we're not going to change overnight are the delays, are the challenges, are the adjournments. But we can certainly inform people so that they're at least prepared to try and cope with that as best as they can.
Okay, thank you. Tamar?
Yeah, and just to echo Tom there, I think you're right in that there are delays and that is just how it is. But also it's you say there about explaining that and communicating that, but also from an early point, would I have carried on if I knew what was going to be ahead? Who knows? But it's just sort of knowing that early on is making an informed decision. You can't make a decision based on something that you're not clear about. And obviously, yeah, the CHISVAs do inform you of that the best they can. But knowing that from the police, sort of when they say, well, what would you like to do or whatever, that you know that. I was never aware that it would take 18 months to get a decision from the police and them to pass it on to the CPS. I was never aware that you sort of go months and months and months without hearing anything from a police officer. And it's that highlights the importance of the regular communication. Like Tom said, instead of waiting months and months to hear from someone, if you just hear every so often that there is no update, that at least then you know that you're still being thought of, that that the case is still going on, it hasn't been forgotten about. And to listen to what we say, so maintaining that trusted relationship, that involves sort of, if a police officer says, I'll do something, to do it. If I say communicate with me and not through my mum, then please communicate with me and not through my mum. I think I've said that for a reason. And it's little things like that that make the difference. That doesn't cost anyone any more time. Well, I don't think it does. Any more time, any more effort, but it means a lot to me. It proves that you've listened to me, and it's what I want. I was old enough to make that decision. You asked me my opinion, and I gave it you, and you didn't listen. There's loads of things like that, but if I've said something, I've said it for a reason, and that maintains that relationship that's trusted, and that's beneficial for both us and the police and the CPS. If we trust you and if we know that you have our best interest at heart, we will work better with you, and it'll feel easier for us, therefore easier for you. And I think it's recognising that beyond the pressures and the demands, the little things are what makes the difference that often don't take time.
Great, thank you. So that moves us on to our next question, which are, what are good examples of change being made to make the process more supportive for survivors? Have you seen or been involved in any success stories? Kat?
Yeah, I mean, not to polish our halos, but I do think that having just makes a massive difference. There's a reason why we do this work is because we think it's really important, we think it has value. The registered intermediaries are absolutely fantastic. That's such a great development. Having somebody involved where you can say to the family, there is someone who's had oversight of these questions, they do feel they're appropriate, they do feel you're going to be able to answer them. They're not going to be effing and jeffing and pointing fingers at you and shouting at you like they might do on, Happy Valley. It's not going to happen like that. And someone who is just there, is listening, is on their side, because we appreciate that barristers and prosecutors can't always, well, they're not on the on the survivor side in the way that the defence is on the alleged perpetrator side. So having an advocate there, I think, is really important. I'm almost evangelical about the victim liaison officers at CPS. They are absolutely fantastic. I think we've got Kat Bex and Tammy in the Raso East Midlands, and they are just wonderful. They go the extra mile all the time, especially when you have a particularly kind of tricky situation where you think, oh God, there's a few kind of speed bumps I can foresee here in the process. And it makes me think about one family in particular that I worked with for a long time, and it could have gone really wrong in a lot of ways, which I was kind of thinking, oh God, what if this happens, what if that happens? But having the VLOs there and having everybody working really, really well together, where I could kind of be the mouthpiece and say, listen, this person's worried about this thing, they're worried about that practical thing, they're worried about this emotional thing, and having the right people able to answer those questions and give me the clarity that I could then pass on, meant that this young person who, at the beginning of this process, felt like nothing would really ever be okay again, that she would never feel safe, that she would never not feel scared, that it would never feel like it was worth it to have told someone what happened. We had a lovely final session where she told me that she felt like it was finally worth it, and that it still gives me goosebumps now because she couldn't see that light at the end of the tunnel for several years. But I feel really proud of the system that we have and what we were able to offer her from those special measures, with having a vet in with her, doing her evidence. She had her appropriate adult. She had the secure entrance at court, so she knew she wasn't going to see anyone she didn't want to see. She had the live link, so she felt like she was kind of separate. We had the input of the VLOs to make sure everything ran smoothly, and that we had someone that I could say, if this happens, I need someone to kind of be on it. For her to then say at the end of it, it was worth it. That I think is the most significant kind of success story, where things could have gone so wrong, but at the end of it, we were all kind of going, oh, that was okay. It was good enough for what it needed to be. So yeah, feels like a really important offering that we gave to her.
Yeah, great, thank you. Tamar?
Yeah, I'll echo what Kat said there. Their CHISVs are great, and I think that is, for me, the most important part. Not to sort of talk about myself too much, but I think all I've done since I've found has given me hope. So feedback and being involved in the participation group. I spoke at the Joint National Police Conference in Aston Villa. I've been involved in CPS training videos, case study style videos, and part of the formal barrister training. And I also attend the CPS rape scrutiny panel. And in the 6 years since, there has been significant change, and I am negative, and I do say what I think quite bluntly, but it's because I care, and it's because I want things to be better. Things shouldn't be how they were for me. I know that, and shouldn't be how they were for my friends. And I care, and I don't want that to be the case. And looking back now, sort of when I do reflect more positively, it does make me proud of how things are better, how people work better, and that only drives me to do more, to go further forward more, and sort of being involved and sort of doing the collaborations and giving my opinion, I guess. It is empowering, it does give me hope, and yeah, but as always, to be the negative one, there are still gaps and there is still work to be done, and that is what drives me.
So thinking of changes that have been made and success stories, I guess, I thought about a family that I'd supported, and I think similar to what you said with yours, there were so many hurdles and ways that it really could have gone wrong, for better word, for more distressing, more traumatic as a whole long process. So I'd supported this little boy, and he was adamant he wasn't going to go to court, and it got to the point where I think the police were a bit stressed that we need him to agree now. But I'd worked with him for a long time, and we did things like a pre-trial visit to court, and I think the impact of that you can't underestimate. So when I'd gone with him, with the family afterwards, he was like, oh, my classroom's bigger than the court. You know, it's not as scary as in the movies. And he thought Judge Rinder was going to be there because his parents watched Judge Rinder, but he also thought cameras were going to be there. And you think without breaking down those kind of thoughts, you don't really know what he's panicking about inside because he's only seen on TV. How else is he supposed to know what a court room is like and how it's held and how it goes? And so he was very reassured that there's no cameras. A bit disappointed for his mum that she wasn't going to meet Judge Rinder, but I think he was okay that he wasn't going to be questioned and stuff really harshly. And I got an intermediary in place because there wasn't one, and he was young. He should have had one. And I explained to family what it was, and by pushing, we got one, and it was really, really important, I think really, really needed for him because, you know, it's easy to see that he's answering questions, he's okay, but knowing what he's like, knowing that he'll probably just comply and answer quickly to get it over and done with, but he won't answer honestly, he'll answer whatever's quickest, and that's not true to how he would want to answer if he felt comfortable. And then that was my first case where I supported where Section 28 was in place. So that was really good to see through, and I think it was positive that he got to give evidence, be supported alongside with me and the intermediary, and it not be on the big pressured day of court. I think one thing that it made me see as well is to be mindful of if that is right for a family. I think it was right for him, and you might have situations where a young person is the only witness, and then their bit's done, and they can not forget that the rest is happening, but they're not involved in it. Whereas for him, it was right for him, but his family, his parents were still having to go to court. So the anxiety was still within the house that whole time. So that was something that, I supported with, but it was something that made me a bit mindful of, we can't just say it's right for every single case, but it did work. And in the end, we didn't get the verdicts that we hoped for, but it did a lot of support around him understanding that, where I actually bumped into his mum recently, and he's done a lot of work, on this type of stuff and on advocating for other young people, and it's completely different to where he could have gone. And he seems quite proud of his journey, from what his mum said, and I think it's a success story, not in the fact that we wanted a guilty and everything, but actually even without that, all the support that was in place, I think it was the best success that it could have been, because he's a strong young man now who's not ashamed.
Yeah, really positive, gives me a lot of hope that Imara are able to kind of deliver training to new police recruits and especially trained officers, and like Abby was saying earlier, that rollout of trauma-informed training I think is a really important piece of all of this. Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I've also been involved in co-producing training with Imara to help them understand the lived experience of survivors and what they can do differently within their role to be more supportive, to make the difference, and what they can offer young people. And I think now the aim is to sort of push that, to sort of reach it into the schools that perhaps aren't reaching out for the training, and it's exciting to see where that hopefully will go.
I think also what we hear from young people is that they need to feel like there's a team around them that's really strong, and that we're working together, that we respect each other, that we have clearly delineated roles. So being able to have what I think is a really good working relationship with the Child Abuse Investigation Unit and other police units that we work quite closely with on our young people's cases feels really important to have regular meetings between just us and them to make sure that we've got that line of communication, the working relationship, that young people can feel the strength of that. And we also collaborate with witness service and witness care, which are different, so that we've got that in the court system and the police force as well. Thank you.
I think when we think about change from a Crown Prosecution Service perspective, I think to the point that you said at the start, Kath, that it's easy to forget some of the real positive changes that we have seen. And I don't say that to suggest that there's not more to do. Of course there is. But when I think back only to 3, 4, 5 years ago, if a victim or a survivor decided that they didn't want to continue with the case anymore, many of our people, many of our prosecutors, their first thought was, well, that's the end of that then. I can't prove that case anymore. Now, their first thought is, that's fine, that's their decision. I've already thought about how I'm going to build this case so that I can still prosecute that individual without their support, because justice is more than someone having to make a decision as to whether they want to consider it. Only a few years ago, the first thought whenever we were dealing particularly with rape and serious sexual offences was, we need to get the phone of the survivor downloaded, pour through their entire life and see who they've been messaging. And now, not only is that not the first step, but when that request inevitably comes in from those who represent the defence, and that's not said with criticism, that's part of their role, but the first response now from our people is, why? What are you suggesting that will show? What relevance does it have? Why are we doing that? And I think we're starting to understand that that invasion of privacy is not seen anywhere else. We don't go into a house and start searching through their drawers and cupboards and trying to unlock everything that we possibly can. So I think there's been a real culture change there in understanding, with myths and stereotypes and evidence-led prosecution, and an offender-centric approach, and that's really positive. But we've got to continue that at the heart of everything we do. And as Tamar says, we've got to do that along the way with all of the support services and bring everyone together.
That's just absolute music to my ears, Tom. And I think what I'm most excited about, really, and I'm slightly biased, obviously, is the work that we do at the Blue Star Project. And we're really privileged to have both Kath, the Chief Executive of Imara, and Steph as associates with us. So here in Nottinghamshire, you've actually got your own mini Blue Star team, in fact, in the Imara team there. What we do at Blue Star is really work across the whole system with police, with voluntary sector, with CAMS, with the CPS, to build that kind of confidence on exactly what Tom was just talking about, that what happens in pre-trial and what happens if notes or information or data is requested. But more than that, I think what I've been really enjoying doing just recently is working a lot more across the system really broadly. So thinking about how do we connect CAMS with the voluntary sector and build that strength around how they work together. How can we train police to take a really trauma-informed approach to making notes requests, as Tom was describing? How do we even help the system, I guess, advocate for young people who've experienced harmful sexual behaviour, and the additional barriers they get to accessing therapy and support? So that conversation, both here in Nottinghamshire and nationally, is something that's really exciting me. And just really, I guess, hot off the press, excited to tell you that we are just about to start some work down in the West Country, working at a regional level with the whole system, to really start to encourage those services to do the very best for children and young people, and to bring to them some of the best practice idea and inspire them. And we'll obviously be talking about the Barnahus, because that's my thing, but we will also be talking about the importance and value of creative arts therapies, services like Imara, like the Greenhouse in Bristol. And so really looking forward to starting to get to some system change work.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we've got one question left. We've run over time slightly, so we've only got a couple of minutes left. But I'd just like to ask everybody, what's the key message that you would most like people to take away from hearing this discussion? Tamar?
So I guess to everyone, quite simply, to care, communicate, do what you should do, and do what you say you will. Obviously, the work is challenging, pressured, but the smallest actions and efforts will make the world of difference to survivors and their journeys.
I think for anyone else who works in criminal justice like myself, it's that point I said earlier, that to remember behind every case is a person. We often speak in the prosecution and police about how each case is different. Well, each person's different as well. And we have to remember that there are people behind the decisions that we take and keep them at the forefront of what we do. We're experts in prosecution in the CPS. We're experts in investigation in the police. We can trust ourselves with that. So if we bring that human factor along as well, then we're going to be heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I think every person who has a contact with a survivor throughout their process has a really beautiful opportunity to be a positive experience of a trustworthy adult and someone who's reliable and consistent. So I think we can all be guilty of kind of sweeping along in, this is what I know needs to happen, and I'm just going to make sure this all goes smoothly. But it is so important after kind of the ultimate violation of somebody's autonomy and control through sexual abuse and domestic abuse to find ways of returning choice, control, autonomy to young people, to survivors. And we can all find ways of doing that, even the tiniest things, because it's showing that you're respecting that person as a person who has kind of sovereign control over their life and their body and what happens to them. So I think it's about returning autonomy and also listening to what's being said. When you're asking a question, what do you want? Listening to what's being said and then doing something about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Cal?
Thank you. I was just going to say, just to not underestimate or forget the impact that you have on a young person, whether you're, the auntie or English teacher or social worker or, Chiswa or something, you don't have to talk about what's happened to help someone through what's happened. And, we can't necessarily change the outcome, but you can definitely have an impact by just showing them value and making sure they're heard.
Thank you. Yeah, it's for all our organisations to understand the importance and recognise that supporting the mental health of our victim survivors, it isn't just about care, it's about restoring safety and trust and hope, and every compassionate action helps to rebuild a life.
I think I just love what Kat said, really, and I wanted to build on that. I think children have a right to be heard, so whether that's deciding on the support they receive, what type and when, whether that's deciding how they're going to give evidence in court, whether that's being involved in the process when someone comes to ask to see their therapy notes, just involve the young people really in that process.
Yeah, okay, thank you everyone. And I think all of you have said this much more eloquently than I have, but I think what I've heard is just very definitely about the importance of communication, how important it is to get that right, to give survivors choice, and to be trauma-informed and consider it in our response as professionals, and what can we all do to make sure that that's what survivors receive everywhere that they go. Okay, so that's the end of the panel. I want to say a huge thank you to Tamar and to the rest of our panellists. I think we've got a slide up with a QR code. So we'd like to invite you, the audience, to submit your key message. So using the QR code, please tell us what else you would like others to hear on this topic.